Okay, greetings, compadres. For your mystery meat sandwich today, I got nothing because I got a guest, and that's just way better. So I am so excited to welcome Ellen Chute today to Eternally Amy. And here's the thing. I was connected with Ellen through a lovely friend of mine who's been on the podcast several times. Her name is Heidi Lee, and I am so grateful to Heidi. Thank you, Heidi. Shout out, love you for connecting Ellen and Ellen and me, the two of us, basically. So I'm so excited to have Ellen on today. Welcome, Ellen.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. I'm delighted to be here and feel exactly the same way about Heidi.
Oh, of
Yes.
course. Okay, awesome. So, okay, let me just tell you a little bit about Ellen because I know once I start, talking to her and, we'll get all off track and I'll forget to mention these brass tacks. So, okay, so Ellen is the president of Empowerment Partners, Empowerment Partners, and she's a clinical social worker. She provides psychotherapy to individuals, couples, and families, as well as consultation in the workplace. Very necessary, very thankful for that because that's tough. Ellen was the director of behavioral health services and chief community outreach officer at Jewish Family Service of Metro Detroit, where, wait for it, she worked for 24 years and was honored with the prestigious Berman Award for Outstanding Professional Service in 2010. She was an adjunct professor at the University of Michigan School of Social Work for more than 20 years. Wow. Ellen is the author of the book, What Drives You? How Our Family Dynamics Shape the Person We Become. And fun fact, she has a podcast and it is called the What Drives You podcast. Oh my goodness. So, Ellen, I'm thrilled to have you here. And I have a little surprise for you. Heidi has left a quote for you, a little message that she wanted to say. And it goes like this, and I quote, "What I love about her work," meaning Ellen's work, "is that she uses a very clever metaphor to get us all thinking about our family dynamics. The family car. Like the one we took trips in as kids. By exploring how we interact in our family car, she helps us see all kinds of new things about our family, ourselves, and who we've become as adults." And that's a quote from Heidi Lee.
Wow.
I
That's
know.
why I love her.
Oh, I do too. I do too. I just love her. And so, Ellen, I'd like to just give you the floor and let you just feel free to launch in and tell us a little bit about, or a lot about your background and how the book came to be, how it sort of formulated in your mind through your experiences, and just go for it.
Okay. Thank you, Amy. I appreciate it. So I would like to take you for a ride in my car. And this is my car growing up. In my car, in the driver's seat of my car, was my father. And in the front passenger seat of my car was my mother. And I'm not really sure why they were positioned like that, because my mother's role in the front seat was to tell my father what to do and where to go and what he was doing wrong. And he sat in the driver's seat, but she was very, very much in control. My seat in the car was in the back seat by myself because I am an only child. Each of my parents, coincidentally, are also only children. So this was a very unique car with 3 people in it. And many of us grow up in cars with 3 or 4 people in it, but there were no adjacent cars. There were no aunts or uncles or big family gatherings. My father came from a very big family, and we would get together with them sometime, but it was really the three of us as I grew up. And every car has its rules. In some cars, they're spoken, and in some cars, they're not spoken, but everybody understands what the rule is because it just sort of is permeated in our bodies, even without anybody saying anything. But in my car, the spoken rule was that little girls are to be seen and not heard. And I think lots of girls in who grew up when I did, which was in the 50s and 60s after the war, would say that they had a similar rule, or that they were told that a lot in their lives. I was an only child. This was actually a second marriage for my mother. My biological father and my mother were married, but got divorced when I was a baby. And this man was who I think of as my father. So my mother brought me with her into the marriage with him, and they tried very hard, but were not able to have more children. So I spent my childhood and adolescence in the back seat of this car. And because my role back then was to be seen and not heard, I took that to mean that my job in that car was to sit quietly, not need anything, not ask for anything, only be part of conversations when I was drawn into them by them. And it turned out to be a solitary place for me, that being in the back seat of the car. My mother was a beautiful, very intelligent, self-absorbed kind of woman who always just looked perfect. I like to say that I never saw my mother in anything but fully dressed with full makeup on. This is as her child. She got up in the morning, she armored up in her lovely outfit and full makeup every day. I never saw her in a bathrobe. I never saw her in lounge clothes. I wonder these days if she would have had leggings, but I doubt it. I doubt it. So my job was to look pretty, kind of as perfect as I could, and sit quietly in the backseat of this car. And I tell people this because it really formed who I am today in many ways by the assumptions that I made as a child that were not necessarily what my parents wanted me to assume, but they were the assumptions that I made as a child, and they have governed how I have lived my life. So that upbringing was very sharply contrasted for me when I would be in the cars, and I mean literally and figuratively, but when I would be with my friends and their families. Their cars were noisy. They were chaotic. Nobody looked so pretty. They were more real than my car. And I thought to myself often that I don't know if my car would have been the way it was had there been a brother or a couple of more children. But with me as the only person in the back, the rules were not challenged. So I noticed this about my friends. I was always a gatherer person. My mother tells a story of, she said, we couldn't take you anywhere. She would say this kind of negatively, but if we went to a restaurant, you'd be on the lap of someone at the next table. I was always looking for more people, more connections, more, just more humanity. And And so my friends' families and made just a huge impression on me, starting from when I was very young, about the nature of my family and how different it was from other families that I saw and that I got to observe sometime. So I just want to tell you briefly about the things that I took from that car, that some of them have served me really well, and some of them haven't served me so well. So being in the back seat of that car, and the only thing really that mattered about me was A, how thin I was, which I never was. B, how well dressed I was, how I looked. It was all sort of a surface level thing. And no one was really interested in my interests or anything deeper. And I don't think they were interested in anything deeper in each other either. So it was a very surface level, very pretty car. So what I took from that car in broad strokes was that I wasn't good enough. I didn't matter. And that I was on my own.
Mhm.
Now, the on my own part has been really helpful for me in my life in many ways, because I learned to be independent. I learned to get what I needed. I learned to gather other people around me to give me more of what I needed because I wasn't getting it there. My parents never objected to that, which in some cars, parents do object. They want you not to have others, but my parents didn't object to that. So I'm very able to figure things out and get things done and do what needs to be done. I don't rely upon people to do for me or to take care of me. And in many ways, those are really solid, positive traits.
Mhm.
In many ways, they're not. So when someone grows up in their family and feels like they don't matter, and I need to tell you that I mattered very much to my parents. If I were to say to them, you made me feel like I didn't matter, they would be horrified. It was not their goal. They didn't know how to make me feel like I mattered because they were operating on their own scheme of what was right for a family, which was that we should all look perfect, basically. So my not mattering, my not being good enough have been things that I have worked on very hard in my adult life. When someone grows up feeling like they don't matter, they generally go in one of two directions in their life because it's really painful to feel like you don't matter. And the direction I took was to make sure that I mattered and that I mattered to a lot of people. So my whole adult existence has been about mattering to people. And I have done that by being a therapist. I am lots of people's person, the one that they turn to, the one that they depend on to live their life in the best way. I taught young social work students for 20 years. Many of those I still have relationships with, because if I could be a mentor to them, if I could help them be the kind of social worker that I think the world needs, I was going to do that. So I mattered to my students. The concept of the car was created for me to teach it to my students. And I would see that we would be in class together. This is when we used to actually be in class together. And I would put chairs at the front and I would deliver my car speech from the back seat of those chairs. And they just started, you could just see, they would leave my class and say, oh, I have to go home and talk to my mother, or I have to tell my brother about this. But more than that, it just helped them to understand the power of this family unit and how it teaches us things, sometimes intended, sometimes not intended, that we then take with us. So most of my clients that I've worked with, when they have something that's a challenge that they wish they did differently, we can always trace it back to the car, always. And I can always help people understand that everybody in their car has a role to play in the car, and that the car needs everybody to play their role in order for the car to keep going from today to tomorrow to the next day. So I have 3 children, 2 daughters and a son. My older daughter's role in our car growing up was to be the go-getter. She was just a high achiever. She knew what she wanted. She just, I think, and she and I have discussed this, I think at many times in her life, she was actually the driver of our car with me and her father, because she just told us, I'm going to take dance and I'm going to do it with them, and I'm going to go to camp with them. And she really led the way. My next daughter, her role in the car was to be the deeper thinker, quieter one who would always sort of be able to entertain herself and find her friends and be absorbed with them. She was also very, very smart and also achieved, but that was sort of secondary to her main role of being that child. My son's role in the family was to be the attention getter, the annoying one. He still very much is. My kids are all in their 40s. He still is the attention getter. He's traded in much of it into being funny and getting people to laugh and doing things like that. But that was his role in the car, was to be the annoying one for his sisters. And boy, when we are all together, you can just see everybody's role come out. Even though they all have their own cars, some of that stuff from our car of origin just never goes away. So that's why I wrote this book, was because the process of understanding that, of creating the car metaphor, of allowing over the years for me to really use it with my clients, for them to understand that these fights they're having today in their family of origin are really just continuations. Everybody's still going back to their old roles. And also about the cars that they have created as an adult and where they sit in that car. It's just been a really helpful framework for people to look at themselves and learn to understand how they got to be who they are, to have compassion for themselves. When I think about sitting in that back seat and trying to look perfect and not mattering, I feel so sad for that little girl. I feel her pain. I'm not mad at myself that I came out feeling like I don't matter. I fully understand it. And I fully understand why I created this adult life where every minute is filled with me mattering to somebody, because I still need it and I still crave it. I had to learn to set boundaries with that, just like as adults, we all learn. But that's why I wrote this book. It is a small, easy to read, but very powerful book that I think can really help people accept themselves, accept their siblings and their parents, who are only members of the car trying to go from day to day to day together. And I just feel like in a lot of ways, it's what the world needs now, is more of that.
Yeah.
Right.
Thank you so much for sharing all of this. And here's the deal, like, I'm just sitting here, I've got so many thoughts in my head. And just as you were talking, it was like things even started to kind of appear to me as I look back on my family car of origin and just our different roles. And I was even thinking about, gosh, I wonder if Ellen had a backseat driver, I mean,
Yes.
who was kind of doing that. And
Yes.
yeah, and is that a common thing to have somebody trying to control, but they're not in the driver's seat?
Oh, I think in every car, either the driver's in control or somebody else is in control.
Mm.
In some cars, somebody from the back also may try to control. And I believe that when those things happen, that it challenges the state of the car. And I think it's a healthy thing. You know what I'm saying? But my mother was the true driver of the car. My father didn't argue with her. I learned as I got older that the real rule in our car was don't upset mom.
Mm,
That
mm,
was the real rule.
mm.
Nobody ever said that rule, but that is how we lived.
Okay, so this brings up something interesting too, which is I feel like that is semi-common. Have you found that it's sort of like, it sometimes appears that the father is driving, but in reality, he's not. It's the
Oh, for
and I
sure.
can tell you 100% that is true in my current family.
Okay. Yes.
And I know that, and I have issues with that. Not, I mean, it's not in every aspect of our life, but a lot of times on a car trip, right? That
Yes.
is that is kind of and I noticed it. I had a little like a Christmas Eve meltdown because I was upset, feeling like I'm the only one working. You guys
Yes.
aren't helping, and it was like the entire tone of my household changed because I had this bad attitude and I saw it. Like it was almost like I was the watcher of what was happening. And I had to step back and just go, all right, you need to go and fix this. You need to go, separate yourself and, get with your higher power, do whatever you need to do because
Yes.
you're poisoning the well right now, and I could see it. So I try and be a little bit cognizant of some of this stuff, but it's fascinating.
Well, let me just tell you that the fact that you could see it, the fact that you could own it, the fact that you took it on to try to get yourself in a different place is the healthiest thing that could happen in a car.
Oh, good.
Also, the healthiest thing that could happen in a car is that the driver's seat is shared.
Mm,
Because sometimes if there's two parents, one does something much better.
mhm,
And sometimes the other one does something better, or there's a need. So a shared driver's seat is really the ideal in a two-parent family.
mm,
Now, a shared driver's seat is absolutely not the ideal in a single parent family
mm,
because that's elevating one of the children into a place of authority that likely may be helpful to the single parent, but it definitely adultifies that child and takes them out of a potential bond with their siblings.
mm. That totally makes sense.
Yes.
And on that note, I was wondering if we could rewind for 1 second to the whole concept of your parents not knowing how to make you feel mattered. That
Right.
just touched me so much because I thought, in my big family, we've got 8 kids and it's just this constant um feeling I have of like, am I seeing you? Am I doing enough? Am I being too smothering? Am I kind of reading your love language, if you will, or am I
Yes.
not? And so I'm just wondering, when you kind of recognized that and if you had a time machine and could go back in time and tell your parents, this is what I needed. Yeah. How do you think it would best be expressed, maybe,
Sure.
or solved?
So I did tell my parents. They completely denied that, and they just got so hurt that it
Mm.
wasn't worth me telling them. Um, but what you said that started it off is that you wonder about if all your children are feeling seen, are if you're doing for them what isn't going to create that.
Mhm.
Right?
Right.
Right. So most of us parent in one of two ways. We either parent unconsciously in the same way we were parented because it worked for us and we just take it with us. I parented in the opposite way that
Mhm.
we were parented. Okay. Because I didn't like that way. And I was definitely going to do it differently.
Mhm.
Now, in as much as my goal was to never, ever have a child who felt like I did in the car, my second daughter is a social worker also.
Mhm.
And we both were teaching at University of Michigan for a while. And she was teaching a class and she invited me in as a guest to her class to talk about the car metaphor. And I spoke about the car and I described the car she grew up in with her father in the front seat and me in the seat next to him. And my seat turned completely around to the back because that's what I did in that car. My oldest daughter behind her father, my middle daughter, this one, behind me, and their brother in the way back of the minivan, annoying everyone. And after I tell that, now this was maybe 6 years ago. She's 40, I've lost track, I don't know, 3 or something. I tell that about the car, and she said, "That's not how I remember the car."
Hmm.
And I said, "What?" And she said, "No. Yeah, I think dad was there and you were there in the front and her sister was in the seat behind dad." But she said, "I remember it that I was in the way back by myself
Oh,
with nobody paying attention to me."
wow.
Yes. So that's why it's impossible to do it perfect.
Yeah, that's for sure.
Yes. But what we can do is be curious about how our children are feeling.
Mhm.
We can say to them, um, I mean, lots of families just use this car and ask their kids where they sit and why, and what it means about them. But I think that if we're curious, and I know you're curious because you just told me you're curious.
Mhm.
So a parent that is curious, I wasn't curious because I was so sure I was doing it right now.
Mm.
You know what I mean? But my mother also was sure she was doing it right.
Sure. Yeah.
So that's why. So
Yeah.
the key is not to be sure
Yeah.
and to wonder and to notice what your children might show or express.
I love that so much, Ellen. I love that. And I want to share with you an experience that I had over New Year's. So every New Year's, we take the whole family off to Palm Springs and we do kind of like a campfire sharing kind of thing. And we talk about goals and how we felt like the year went for us as individuals. And the topic of forgiveness came up, and I'm not sure exactly. I can't remember how or what we were talking about that spurred that. But when we got to my sharing time, oh, I know, we were talking about my son's football season. And he was saying how I had been to every game and he was so thankful and all this stuff. So my firstborn daughter was a cheerleader, like a competitive cheerleader. And
Mhm.
so they had competitions all over the place. You know, it was super rigorous schedule. And I spent a lot of that time when she was doing competitive cheer mad, and just mad at the whole concept of select sports. And just, you know, I kept telling her at that time, it's not you. I'm just mad at the whole principle of it. And, you know, the fact that you can't go on a family vacation, you know, and I was like just getting on my soapbox during those years. And I was pregnant with a couple other babies. And I mean, I could give you 10,000 excuses that I felt like at the time were valid. And
Yes.
so, but really, you know, none of that made a difference to her because, you know, she was hurt that I didn't show up, like just to be 100% honest. And so when we were talking about that on New Year's Eve, and, you know, I hear my son sharing about football, I just go, hey, I want to just throw this out here right now. I need to make an apology and I need to make an amends. And so I just did that in front of everybody. And, you know, I just told her, look, I know that was important to you. I knew it then. And I was remiss in not making a better effort.
Hmm.
And I don't know how to tell you how sorry I am, except to change my behavior now. And so I'm lucky enough, she goes to school locally. She's at a local university and she's a cheerleader. And so basketball season is here and she's cheering. And so I told her, like, if I am in town, I will be at that game. I will be at every single game on the roster. And so far that has worked out. It's been absolutely true that I've been able to follow through with that. And, you know, she, of course, was lovely and forgiving and like, was like, Mom, that's it, whatever. Like, don't even worry about it. But it's important, you know, to me to do what I can, even though I can't change the past. And, you know, just to show her that, you know, I had a huge part in making you feel pretty crappy at that time. And, you know, I can't make it right, but I just want to show you now just how I see that. And I see that what I did hurt you. And, you know,
So,
she and I have such a close relationship and such a lovely relationship. And, yeah, I hope that that posturing is something that I'm able to continue.
so I want to say to you, there, there is no such thing as right. It is what it is.
Yeah.
And whatever happens to our children is just part of their path.
Yep.
And their path is no easier or no more beneficial when when things are more right. Life is life. It's never going to be right. There's always going to be things that we disagree with or think differently about or make us feel bad. The
Mhm.
most we can ever hope for in those situations is that somebody validates that and recognizes it and grows from it and perhaps changes as a result, but the change isn't even really so important. It's just to have a child whose mother says, I'm really sorry. I wouldn't do that today. I understand that was wrong and it must have been hard for you. That's as right as it gets.
I love
Right?
it.
Right doesn't mean that you do everything right. Right means that you are accountable to your children when you don't do it right.
Mhm. Yeah.
That is a much more I prefer children to be disappointed and get over it than never to be disappointed.
I love it.
That's a
Love it.
really, really important life skill.
Yep.
Yes. So this is about forgiveness for yourself.
Yes. That's so key. That is so key.
Right.
And also, you know, it helps to get that forgiveness of self and work on that so that, I can move forward from that space and not be, doing the martyr victim vacillating thing.
Yes, yes, exactly.
Yeah,
Yes, I call it not be caught in a shame spiral, which
I love
is,
it. Yeah,
yes, right,
exactly. Which
right.
it inevitably does the opposite of what one thinks it's doing. So what I mean by that is, for me at least, I feel like that's when, then I'm just kind of taking a bath in self, and it's like, wait a minute,
Exactly.
this was about the other person, not
Yes,
about you.
yes. You know what I say about those times? We do something that makes us feel better, but it
Mm.
doesn't help us get better.
Mhm. Mhm.
Right, right,
It's so true.
right. But in order to do something that helps us get better, we need to have compassion for our own hurt and allow
Yep.
ourselves to act toward our values, whatever
Yep.
our values are. Right.
I love
And when you said that time when you were pregnant and a couple times, like all those things that you mentioned, just bring your resilience down so that you
it.
just really don't have maybe the strength to just do it all. And you're
Mhm.
going to look for something that just feels like too much.
Yeah.
It's human.
Yeah,
Yeah,
so, so true.
right. It's human. Your daughter's going to have that too.
Oh, yeah. Yeah,
Of
that is true.
course.
Yeah.
Right. Right.
Thank you for that. That's lovely.
You're
Um,
welcome. My pleasure.
and one thing I was wondering if I could have you speak to, I was thinking about, gosh, um, I don't really know if there's a term for this, but that circumstance where uh you get around family members and suddenly you're like, oh, I feel like I'm suddenly reverted. I'm 14 years old again with my parents, and I'm this, that, and the other thing. And I adore my parents, nothing negative about them, but I think that, and I have had a tendency to really have to, like, sort of bite my tongue and not do this with my kids, just because I don't want to. Again, kind of one of those things where, I'm probably trying to rectify something that,
Sure.
I didn't like. But they, sometimes we can put people in ice cube trays or
Mhm.
park them in parking spaces,
Yes.
and like sort of refuse, not even consciously, to realize that we're all living, breathing, dynamic people, right?
Yes.
And hopefully changing and growing, or at least being open to it, hopefully. And it's like this whole thing where, well, I'll give an example, and this is totally benign, and my husband would not mind, nor would his parents if I shared this, but he used to play, my husband used to play the organ when he was a kid. And he was telling me, man, I hated doing that, And his parents will say, oh, no, he loved playing the organ. He loved it. And so
Yes.
it's just this funny, different perspective, but also, it's this funny conundrum where, like, if you were to ask my husband today, hey, are you an organ player? He'd be like, no, but my parents-in-law would say yes. So
Yes.
it's just this, maybe assumption of roles, or if I guess this is a really long way of me asking, do people's roles in the car ever change?
People's I don't believe people's roles in the car change, especially when you're in that car.
Mm,
Okay? And that's what happens to you when you're with your family and you get this feeling. That feeling is embedded in your body from
mm,
when you were little. It is embedded there. It is hard for that feeling not to come up. Okay? But what you're talking about with your husband and the organ is that everybody, it's funny, everybody in the car has their own perception of everybody else's roles, the rules of the car. So you can have people from the same family. I work with lots of family members individually. You
mm,
know what I'm saying?
mhm.
Um, Adults. I'm talking about adults.
Sure.
and they're all talking about the same family, and I'm thinking, what? It's just so different. So
Wow.
so his parents' perception of him playing that organ is just something that they needed to see it that way. That's
Yeah.
all. Yeah.
So
And
interesting.
he didn't want to see it that way once he was finished with it, because it was
Right.
really, the organ was for them.
Right. Right.
Yes.
Yeah,
Right.
or like that whole concept of like, well, you hate tomatoes. Well, I did when I was 3, but
Right.
now I love tomatoes,
Right.
and
Yes.
just this funny, like, is it possible that we could change? Like, it's
It is.
possible.
It is. It's a sign of health when we
Uh-huh.
change, and it's a sign of even greater health, and I mean emotional health, when we change and we're able to be with our parents in our changed state.
I love that.
Yes.
So beautiful. Do you think some family members, like, think they're in one place in the car, but sort of everybody else is kinda like, "Oh, yeah, no, that person's doing this."
Totally. Absolutely. I think more often than not, family members would ascribe different seats in the car to their siblings than their siblings would for themselves.
Interesting.
Oh, for sure. I mean, sometimes we can all agree that someone was the sick one or the needy one, or we can agree, sometimes the roles, families that have a disabled child, like,
Mm,
things like that. But for the most part, if people are of the same normative level, everybody's going to see things a little differently. I've had members of family who one thought their mother was the driver and one thought their father was the driver.
oh, interesting.
Yes. So it all depends. And we have to remember that the family creation plays out over time. So
Mhm,
it isn't really the same car when the first child is born as when, the third or fourth or eighth child comes into the family. It's not the same car. It's not.
mm,
The car has driven a lot of highway and learned and changed and adjusted through all those years. And many times I hear of um, somebody saying to me, well, I was the first child and my parents just had no money, and it really affected my childhood and what I was able to do and participate in. And then, by the time my sister or brother came along, my dad was doing really well, and it really changed how our whole family lived. So
mm.
there's all kinds of considerations about that.
That's amazing. One thing I think this might have been in researching for your interview, I think this was a YouTube video. It wasn't maybe worded like this in your book, but I think it might have been an interview on a YouTube video that I saw. And you were saying how, just linking back for a second to being in the back of the car and not feeling like you mattered. Um,
Mhm,
you were saying something about, I think, that you felt sad for your parents, that
mhm.
they were viewing you in this one sort of narrow lens.
Yes,
And I just thought, gosh, that's so, yeah, so fascinating because the fact that you could make that bridge and get to that compassion for them,
right.
I just thought that was so beautiful.
Oh, thank you. It took me a lot of work. I mean, it took a lot of therapy. It took I'm a 12-step person. It took a lot of work
Mhm.
to get me to the place of being able to have compassion for myself,
Mm,
and also um appreciate that. I feel so sad for, I don't know if they would have appreciated but in so many places now, I am just this beloved person that
mhm,
they I don't know, would that make them feel good if they knew that? I don't know, but it would make me as a parent feel good to know that my children were beloved people. I mean, it happens to me, thank God, regularly that I hear things like that about my children.
mm,
Um, so I feel sad. I feel sad that I never met up to their expectations, that they wanted this cute, skinny, country club girl. And I was just never that. I was never that. You want to go into social work? Like, like they just didn't get it. They just
Yeah.
didn't.
Yeah.
So I feel sad for their narrowness, their restrictedness, which just kept them from getting so much from life that they didn't get. They had
Mhm.
lovely lives, don't misunderstand me.
Sure.
Right. But very different lives than I have or I would want to have or my children have.
Mhm. Mhm.
Mhm.
Do you think at all, like, is there anything to this being like a generational thing? Because I know my mom, if she were sitting here with us, she would be like, "Oh, that sounds like Ellen's describing my mom," because
Yes, it is 100% generational.
Mm,
I was raised in the 50s. In the
yeah,
50s, American families had shoulds. You
yes.
should do this. You should look like this. You should dress like this. You should eat like this. You should live in one of those square houses where they're
Mm,
all the same on every block. And there were so many shoulds. And we live in a society now where so many of those shoulds have broken down and continue to expand and allow much more diversity, much more humanity, much more, so much stuff. So that I grew up fully in the shoulds.
mm,
That's why. And your
yeah.
mom probably did too.
Mhm.
Right,
Absolutely. Yeah.
right,
Yeah.
right.
Gosh, what an incredible it's just an incredible metaphor that everybody can relate to.
Thank
Um,
you.
and truly so many layers, deep that you could sort of explore within this whole fascinating idea. And I just love it. And I'm just feeling extremely blessed and with a full heart that you've shared all this with us, Ellen. And I'm just wondering as we wrap up, is there, anything else that I've left out? Anything you want to make sure that I point out or you say, or anything at all?
I guess I would like to finish it by saying I'd like people to learn to love themselves so
Mm.
that they can then love others. And the process of coming to understand and love yourself doesn't mean there's still lots of things about yourself that you don't love, but enough of the time that you are enough. You are enough.
That literally makes me want to start crying. That
Oh,
is so lovely. And
thank
I
you.
also love yourself so you can love others, right? Like,
You can't otherwise. You
gotta
just
start.
can't.
Yeah.
Yep. Yep.
Oh,
That's the beginning. Thank you, Amy.
so much, Ellen, for coming on, for sharing your unique, lovely perspective. Just so incredible. And I have to say, just it's a delight and a joy to meet you.
Thank
And
you.
so, to the listeners, remember, be kind, rewind, take what you like, and leave the rest behind.
Love it.